Hey, I've been wanting to talk about circumcision.
Well, that makes one of us.
Yeah, I mean it's first of all, the way the prenatal test is done by 12-week ish
Mhm.
because of the blood test. Most people do gender reveal and they find out what they're having, and
Did you
it's
do gender reveals? I never. I mean, not gender reveals. Did,
no,
did you know? Not gender reveals because we weren't. There wasn't the internet back then, right? When we were having kids, not to date ourselves,
I'm
but
Korean.
yeah.
I firstborn has to be a boy. So when my wife was pregnant, I remember at Boston City Hospital, even though machine was really crude,
Yeah.
this is 97. I was trying to ask her, can I just scan you one more time? I studied around 12 weeks just to see if I can catch something in between.
Hmm.
But I knew we were having a boy.
Hmm.
Didn't you?
Oh yeah. So we knew,
Yeah.
but I was just happy to know. I didn't really care what it was.
Yeah.
What it was. I was happy that everything looked like that. That scan looked okay.
Yeah.
Of course, we can talk about this too at some point. It's a little dicey when they're throwing out different measurements and
Yeah.
numbers at you and get very nervous when you're sitting there with a tech.
Right.
And especially when they leave and say, "I'll be right back with the doctor." But yeah, we knew what we were having. But it was fun to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have 3 girls, so I never had to.
You have 3 girls, no boy?
3 girls, no boys. So I never had to dive into the circumcision topic, but let's go. Let's do it.
So, I mean, I have 4 boys, and I don't remember how the first one, I don't even know if I was involved with the decision making.
Hmm.
I mean, I probably was asked, and I said, okay, whatever. But for Koreans, I think Korea has a very unique history when it comes to circumcision. So until 1945, when the World War II ended, Japan surrenders in August 15th of 1945, and then soon after, U.S. occupies South Korea and Russians and Chinese North Korea. Until then, no Korean boys were circumcised. None. Then, until recently, per capita, more Korean boys were circumcised than any other nation. That's called Uncle Sam's influence. And I read an article where, looking at Korean internet sites, almost all of them, like 97%, are pro-circumcision. And only about 3% really kind of brings up this topic about, well, maybe it should not be done, right?
Mhm.
So where it stands for us in this country, American Academy of Pediatrics says circumcision, at least in this country, there is no medical benefit, but should be made available to those parents who desire the procedure, right? That's how I understand it, more or less.
More or less, there's no different details. I mean, yeah, on the surface, that's the statement, but you keep going.
And that's what I tell patients.
Yep.
And I find that compared to when I was a medical student in the 1980s, I feel like maybe 3 out of 4 were boys were circumcised.
Yep.
Now I think it's more like 2 out of 3. Definitely there's a downward trend,
Yeah.
And then I looked into history of circumcision in Korea. Now, I was not circumcised. And that's because...
That's the big reveal. Right?
That's the big reveal. Chun was not circumcised. And because I was not circumcised, I wanted my boys to be circumcised, But it probably had to do with economics, because poor people in Korea were not circumcised. But I think if you're not circumcised and you went to military in Korea, because there's a mandatory 3 years of service, which I think is a little less now. But I think you get circumcised when you get into the military, because
Really?
Yeah, gee, no thank you. There's a reason not to join Korean military.
Wow.
But
To change my itinerary.
But think about that. Here's a country, long history, no circumcision ever, probably because we didn't know how anyway, but it was never done. And then all of a sudden, it's done. And at some point, I want to talk about plastic surgery in Korea. Because one of the theories, because Koreans love plastic surgery.
Okay.
Right?
Since when?
Here's a theory.
Yeah.
Apparently, during Korean War, American surgeon in Korea started this eyelid surgery to make upper eyelid double like Westerners, rather than like, I mean, I have slanted eyes. This is how I was born. I'm never going under the knife, you know?
Yeah.
But that's when the trend started.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, wow. So 1950s, plastic surgery trend starts, and shortly before then, circumcision. Whose fault is that? I mean, I love America, right?
Yeah.
But it's still, damn it, it's American influence.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'm going to do a little more research, because there is the plastic surgery is huge. I mean, when I watch Korean TV show or movies, right, I can't really tell what nationality these actors are. And then you search up on internet, I see these are actors before and after pictures. I mean, it's like literally black and white. They've had so many surgeries, but that's what people want, I think. Anyways, I got off the subject, but
So that's so. Yeah, so that there's the two.
bottom line, both circumcision and plastic surgery,
It's United States fault. Right?
United States fault.
Well, plastic surgery comes from within, right? So people wanted to, yeah. So that's interesting. Like they wanted to change their looks to look less Korean.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of United States too. There's a lot of different ethnic backgrounds that try to look like different ethnic backgrounds sometimes, right? Whether it's changing the color of your skin a little bit or your hair, and and for different reasons, and it's that's really complicated. I think
It is.
So I'm interested actually. I didn't know the history on circumcision and Korea, and I'm wondering what other countries we can look more into that. Like what other countries, if this is an interesting topic, have done with that, or which countries have done it. Because United States, yeah, I think definitely years ago, like when I was younger, it was probably up to 70-75%. I think it dipped a little bit. I think you might be able to pull something up. I think it's probably still around 65 or so, 70%.
Yeah.
That's my quick guess. And I like to say I'm not a numbers guy. Like I'm not great at remembering percentages and pulling things out of my whatever. But I have a ballpark. So yeah. So the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a statement. I forget how many years ago it was. This is 2021, probably about 10 years ago. That really said. I mean, there is some data to support. There's different studies out there that show that there can be less STDs or STIs, as we call them now.
Well, particularly in Africa, right?
Exactly, right. So there are studies that can show that there is less chance of certain infections. Not all STIs are less, some aren't. We don't know why. But that goes to maybe like a deeper thing of not really preventing the infection by circumcising, but preventing the infection by safe practices. So some of these studies I haven't looked at all the when we look at studies, right, we have to really look at how they're done. Are they double blinded? How's the data collected? Any confounding variables? So there are numbers out there that could say, yeah, there's less chance of getting certain infections if you're circumcised. I think that but the American Academy of Pediatrics, as you said, really basically the policy statement basically says that the main reasons to circumcise your child are cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, and personal preference.
Yeah.
So those are powerful statements.
Sure.
No one's going to argue with cultural or religious, right? And I think this is where we come from, I'm going to argue with personal. So if someone says, I want to circumcise my child because, then that's okay.
Because you were done.
For whatever reason,
Yeah.
I have families in practice where dad is and kids aren't, or vice versa. And if someone says, I don't want to circumcise my child for these reasons, and if the bottom line is personal, then that's just as right. And I think that was good for the American Academy of Pediatrics to say, really, whatever you choose is fine, because you can look at these numbers however you want. You could say, yeah, there's a decrease in infections, the decrease in penile cancer, which is extremely low to begin with.
Yeah.
But you can look at these numbers all you want, and you can look at the people who are anti-circumcision in their arguments in terms of how it might affect stimulation for the male, or how you're removing an unnecessary body part, or how there could be poor outcomes after circumcision, which is with any surgery, although it's usually a minor surgery. But you can look at these numbers either way, and there's a lot of definitely anti-circumcision, maybe not as much pro, because people who are doing it for reasons that you can't argue with.
Yeah.
So my feeling is it's really important to recognize that, and even more with social media that's out there. There's information out there, and you have to really be careful how you look at it. but you do what you feel comfortable with. I mean, I can list the reasons why you should do it.
Yeah.
And I can list the reasons why you shouldn't do it. But the main reasons are cultural, religious, and what you want to do. It's totally fine. But people can talk about, well, you're removing a piece of a body part without talking to your child, and how can you make the decision for them? Well, we do a lot of stuff like that. We pierce kids' ears. We take out their wisdom teeth. I mean, maybe it's maybe bad analogies, right? But I really think, no one's going to argue with someone who's, from the religion not to do it, not, if they're doing it appropriately, performing it correctly, or whatnot. So but I think it's interesting how influence, and that's probably what happened in America too. Like there's an influence of certain people, and people started doing it because it was, people thought it was the right thing to do for different reasons. But I think now we know that really those are the three big reasons.
I was just looking up other countries like Korea, Philippines.
Yeah.
Now, similar history. Philippines in 1800s, I think it was under control of Spain, and then Spanish-American War, we took over, and we have one of the biggest naval bases in the world is in Philippines, right?
Yeah.
But boy, looking at this data, like 93% overall prevalence of circumcision. So Philippines and Korea stand out, and these are two countries where U.S. played huge role in during the both World War I and World War II and after.
Yeah.
Interesting. But for me, I come back to my boy. I don't really remember why the first one was circumcised, and then after that, I wanted to make sure the other boys were the same.
Okay.
So there you go.
But that's your reason.
Yeah.
And is that wrong? No.
I mean, at least my kids, I don't think they'll come back and say, "Dad, gosh darn it, why did you do this to me?" I don't think they'll do that. But
yeah, the interesting thing would be, one thing to think about is interesting, like kids who are circumcised, like what's the data on them saying, "Hey, I want my foreskin back?"
Yeah.